My friends, I want you to picture something with me. A cup. An ordinary kitchen cup. The chipped one that lives beside the coffee pot. The one your hands know so well you could find it in the dark. Now let me tell you what goes inside it. A soft yellow powder. Nothing frightening. Nothing you'd need gloves for. It smells faintly of bread dough or the inside of a feed barn on a summer morning. And that powder does two things at once. Two things that have no business belonging to each other. It feeds your grass. Real nitrogen. The same nutrient inside those heavy bags at the hardware store, the ones you and I can barely lift into the cart anymore. Your grass drinks it in and answers with a deeper green, a thicker stand, the look of a lawn that's had a good night's sleep. And at the very same time, in the same soil, in the same hour, it starves weeds, quietly, patiently, before they ever see daylight, feeding and starving, in the same cup. I know how that sounds. I'm 68 years old, and I've heard every miracle a garden catalog ever promised. When someone tells me one product does two opposite things, my first instinct is to check my wallet's still in my pocket. So let me be plain. I'm not selling anything. No link, no code, no bucket with my face on it. This costs about $20 a bag, and you can buy it from anyone. I'd rather you did, but stay with me. Because the most surprising part isn't what is in the cup. It's when you use it. Because if you get that wrong, and most people do, including gardeners who've been at this 40 years, this very same cup will feed your weeds instead of starving them. You'll grow the finest crop of crabgrass of your life, and you'll have paid for the privilege. I'll show you exactly how to get it right. And I'll tell you something almost nobody says out loud. The cup cannot do this alone. It never could. 3 quiet helpers hold the door open for it. And every one of them is free. And every one of them means less work for you. Not more. Pour yourself something warm. Sit down. This one's worth the whole cup. Before I tell you what that powder is, let me tell you what it isn't. Some of you have been pouring things on your lawn that you saw on a phone screen. Vinegar straight from the jug, table salt in hot water. One kind man told me he'd used a mixture from a 15-second video, and now there's a bare brown scar across his front yard the shape of a garden hose. I'm not scolding you. I'd have tried it too, 40 years ago. When a lawn frustrates us, we reach for whatever's within arm's length. But salt and vinegar do work. That's the trap. You see the wilt by supper time and you feel like a genius. What you don't see is underneath. Salt doesn't leave. It settles into that soil and takes the water out of every root that ever tries to grow there again. You haven't killed a weed. You've sterilized a patch of ground, and it may not forgive you for years. So here's the difference. Hold on to it, because it's the whole soul of this video. Salt and vinegar attack the plant. What's in that cup doesn't attack anything at all. It arrives before the weed does, and quietly removes the one thing a newborn weed cannot live without. It isn't a weapon, it's an absence. And that, my friends, is a very different kind of gardening. So where did this come from? Who found it? Here's what I love about this story. Nobody was looking for it. It's 1986, Iowa State University. A professor of horticulture named Nick Christians is studying a disease that attacks the fine bent grass on golf greens. Nothing to do with weeds at all. To grow the fungus, he needs something protein-rich for it to live in. So he uses a cheap, humble byproduct of the corn mills. A yellow powder they'd been feeding to hogs and chickens for generations. He lays out his plots, seeds grass across the whole area, and waits for the disease to do its work. And that's when he sees it. The plots where he'd spread that yellow powder. The grass seed hadn't come up. Barely at all. Now, most of us, and I include myself, would have muttered something unkind, scratched the ruined plots off the notebook, and started over. Nick Christian stopped, and he looked. That's the moment the whole thing turns, because he didn't ask, "Why did my experiment fail?" He asked, "Why did the seeds not grow?" I've turned that small difference over more than I care to admit. Nearly everything worth knowing that I ever learned in a garden came out of a failure I was too stubborn to walk away from. He chased that question for years, and what he found was this. Hiding inside the protein of that corn byproduct are naturally occurring compounds that reach into a germinating seed and stop it from forming a root. Not the leaf, not the stem, the root. In 1991, Iowa State was granted a patent on it as a natural pre-emergence herbicide. The first honest organic weed preventer a university ever put its name behind. And it came out of a ruined experiment, and a man curious enough to kneel down and ask why. The powder in the cup is corn gluten meal. Corn, gluten meal. Now, listen carefully for 30 seconds, because this single point is where more good gardeners fail than anywhere else in this video. Corn gluten meal is not cornmeal. Not the cornmeal in your pantry. Not the box you use for cornbread. Not corn flour. Not corn starch. Not cracked corn from the feed store. They sound like cousins. They are not. Corn gluten meal is what's left when corn is soaked and separated in the mills. The starch goes off to become sweeteners. The protein stays behind and is dried into that yellow powder, about 60% protein, and the root-stopping compounds live inside that protein. Grocery store cornmeal is mostly starch. There isn't enough of the active protein in it to stop a seed doing anything at all. So if you buy a bag of plain cornmeal this weekend, spread it, and nothing happens. You'll come back and tell me I was wrong. And you'll be sincere. And you'll have been let down by one missing word on a bag. Read the label. It must say corn gluten meal, nitrogen around 9 or 10%. If the bag doesn't say gluten, put it back on the shelf. That's your first aha. It just saved you a season. So how does it work? What actually happens down there in the dark? Let me tell it to you the way I understand it, kneeling on my old foam pad with my hands in the dirt. A weed seed is a small, closed thing. It's been waiting, maybe for years, for two signals, warmth and water. When those signals arrive, the seed opens, and the very first thing it sends out, before the leaf, before anything you or I could ever see, is a root. A single pale thread, reaching down. That thread is everything. It is the mouth, the anchor, the well. Because the seed carries only a small packed lunch of stored energy. Enough for a few days. No more. It is betting everything that the root will find water before the lunch runs out. And here is what corn gluten meal does. It lets the seed open. It lets it spend its energy. It lets it reach. And when that little root tries to form, it can't. The compounds in the corn protein interrupt it. The root never develops. The thread never reaches. The well is never dug. And the seed sits there in the warm dark, holding out its hand for water it cannot take. It doesn't get burned. It doesn't get poisoned. Nothing violent happens to it at all. It simply runs out of lunch. And that is why I chose the word starve for the title of this video. Because that is exactly, literally, what happens. Now look across the same square foot of soil. Your grass, your good, established grass, has roots that were dug years ago. Deep, branched, thirsty roots, already drinking. The powder cannot touch them. Its power is only over roots being born, never over roots already living. And what does your grass find sitting on top of it? 10% nitrogen. A slow, gentle, natural feed. Not the harsh salt fertilizer jolt that greens a lawn in 4 days and leaves it gasping in 3 weeks, but a soft protein nitrogen the microbes must break down and hand over slowly, across weeks. The same cup, the same hour. It feeds the old and starves the newborn. Because the only difference between your grass and that weed, the only one that matters here, is who already had roots. I've turned that over more than once in the quiet of an early morning. The ones with deep roots get fed. The ones just beginning have a much harder road. I'll let you sit with that as long as you like. Now, I put 1 cup in the title of this video, and I owe you a straight answer about what 1 cup actually does. The research rate, the one from Iowa State, the one on the bag, is 20 pounds for every 1,000 square feet. And I know exactly what happens when a man my age hears that. His eyes glaze over. He pictures dragging the spreader out of the shed. He decides to do it next weekend. And the weekend after. And then it's July. So let me put it in kitchen language. Our language. 1 level cup of corn gluten meal weighs about 1/3 of a pound, and it treats about 16 square feet. A patch, 4 feet by 4 feet. Picture that. A square about the size of a small area rug. Your raised bed. Your rose border. The strip along the driveway where the Crabgrass sets up camp every June. That bare corner by the mailbox. You don't need a spreader for that. You need a cup in 5 minutes. And here's the part I want you to really hear. So many of us have shrunk our gardens over the years. From the big yard to the raised beds. From the raised beds to a few containers and 1 strip of grass we still care about. And every product on that shelf is sized for a young man with a big lawn and a strong back. This one isn't. This one scales all the way down to a coffee mug. A 25-pound bag holds about 75 cups, roughly 1,200 square feet. Most front lawns, or a raised bed garden and a few borders kept clean for 2 full seasons. If you do have real lawn to cover, use a spreader at a medium setting and walk it twice. North to south, then east to west. 2 light passes lay it down more evenly than 1 heavy one. That's true of most things in life. But whatever tool you use, full measure or don't bother. Spread it thin to stretch the bag, and here's what happens. You still deliver the nitrogen, but you don't deliver enough of the root-stopping protein to matter. And do you know what you've built then? A weed nursery, well-fed. Half a measure doesn't give you half a result. It gives you the opposite result. Now stop. Before you go anywhere near a garden center, walk out to your lawn and look at it honestly. Not at the weeds. At the ground between the weeds. Can you see soil? Bare, brown, open soil showing through in patches? Then I want you to do something no one selling you anything will ever tell you to do. Put the bag back. Buy grass seed instead. I mean it. And this is the mistake I see more than any other. Made by good, experienced gardeners who've been at this for decades. That cup only feeds what already has roots. That is its entire nature. That's the whole trick. So if a third of your lawn is bare ground, there is nothing there for it to feed. You've just spread 10% nitrogen across open, empty soil. And open, empty soil is exactly where weeds live. Spreading a pre-emergent on a thin lawn is pouring money onto dirt. So be honest with your own 2 eyes. If your lawn is reasonably full, thin in places, tired maybe, but green and closed, the cup is for you, and it will serve you well. If it's bare and struggling, the cup can wait a season. Fill the ground first. I'll show you exactly how in a few minutes, and it costs almost nothing. I'd rather you succeed slowly than fail expensively. Now, when? This is a pre-emergent. Before. Before the seed opens. Before the root reaches. Before there's a single green thing to see. Which means, if you walk out one Saturday, spot crabgrass in the driveway cracks, and drive to the store that afternoon, you are too late. Those weeds already have roots. They'll stand there and drink your nitrogen and thank you kindly for it. You have to arrive before the party starts. And the whole art of this is knowing when the party starts. The textbook answer is soil temperature. Crabgrass wakes when the top couple of inches hold around 55 degrees. Iowa State's guidance is mid-March into early April, 3 to 5 weeks ahead of germination. You can buy a soil thermometer for a few dollars. If you like gadgets, do it. But my grandmother never owned a thermometer in her life, and her lawn was cleaner than mine. She used the Forsythia. You know the bush. Scraggly, unremarkable, sitting in a hedge doing nothing all winter. And then one morning in early spring it detonates into that shocking, cheerful yellow. The first real color in the neighborhood, when everything else is still brown and undecided. Here's what nobody tells you about that yellow. That bush is not blooming on a calendar. It is blooming on soil temperature. Its roots are down in the same dirt as your crabgrass seeds, feeling the same warmth, counting the same days. Forsythia is nature's alarm clock. It doesn't wake you for spring. It wakes you for crabgrass. When you see that yellow, you have roughly a 2-week window. That is your moment. That is when the cup goes out. And if you garden down south, you may not have much Forsythia. Watch the red bud instead. When those trees flush that dusty pink-purple along the roadsides, your soil is saying the very same thing. A couple of weeks earlier. Then there's a second season. Late August into early September. A whole crop of weeds. Henbit, chickweed, annual bluegrass. Germinates in the fall, while everyone's put the tools away and stopped paying attention. That's why your lawn seems to sprout weeds out of nowhere the following March. They didn't come from nowhere. They came out of last September, and they've been growing quietly all winter beneath the frost. 2 mornings. Spring, when the yellow comes. Late summer, when the heat breaks. Now I'll give you what I promised at the top. The piece that decides whether this works or backfires. And I'll be honest. This is the part almost every video on the subject skips. It's why so many good people try corn gluten meal once, get nothing at all, and never touch it again. Here it is. Water it in, lightly, once. Then leave it alone, and pray for dry weather. That's it. And the reason is not what most people think. The light watering carries the root-stopping compounds down to where the seeds are waking. It has to happen. A gentle rain will do it. 10 minutes with a sprinkler will do it. You're not soaking anything. You're just tucking it in. But after that, what those little seedlings need in order to die is a drought. Remember what's happening down there. That baby weed has spent its energy. Its root has failed. It's sitting in the dark with no well to drink from. The only thing that can rescue it now is water arriving on its own, soaking the ground so thoroughly that the seedling drinks straight through its tissue, recovers, and tries again. So if you spread your corn gluten meal and it then rains for 5 days straight, you have not stopped a single weed. Worse, you've handed every one of those seedlings a full drink and 10% nitrogen. The powder doesn't kill the weed, my friends. The dry days do. The powder only opens the door. Iowa State says it plainly in their own guidance. Heavy rain or irrigation after application reduces its effectiveness. That's the university that invented the thing, telling you its honest limit. So here's what I want you to do, and it costs you nothing. Before you open the bag, look at the forecast. Light rain or a light watering on day 1, then 4 or 5 dry days. 4 or 5 days of the sky minding its own business. If a wet week is coming, close the bag, put it in the shed. Wait, I know that sounds like a small, dull thing. Check the weather. Any child could do it. But that small, dull thing is the whole difference between a lawn that gets quietly cleaner every year and a man standing in his driveway in July, wondering why the organic way doesn't work. It works. It simply asks you to wait for the right morning. And after all these years, waiting for the right morning may be the only real gardening skill I ever learned. Here's the second mistake, and this one I have never once heard anyone mention. Do the arithmetic with me. It takes 10 seconds. 20 pounds of corn gluten meal, 10% nitrogen. That is 2 pounds of nitrogen across 1,000 square feet. Now, the standard recommendation for feeding a lawn is about 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet per feeding. Do you see it? That cup is not a light snack. It is a double feeding. So here's what happens in yards all over this country every April. A good man spreads his corn gluten meal on Saturday. And then, because it's spring, and that's simply what one does in spring, he goes back out on Sunday with a bag of lawn fertilizer, or a weed and feed, which is fertilizer with a pre-emergent already mixed in. He has now fed his lawn 3 or 4 times what it can use. And that doesn't make grass stronger. It makes it grow fast and soft. Long, tender blades that flop over, catch disease, and scorch the moment the heat arrives. The rest of the nitrogen he paid for washes down and out into the storm drain and into a creek somewhere that never asked for it. So write this on the card and tape it inside the cupboard door. If you use the cup, you do not fertilize. The cup is the fertilizer. That's the whole rule. And it saves you $60 and a Sunday afternoon. 1 product. 2 jobs. That was the promise at the very beginning of this video. And now you know it was the literal truth. There's something else. And I want to say it before you go out and make a mistake I've made myself. Corn gluten meal cannot tell a weed seed from a grass seed. It doesn't know. It doesn't care. It has no loyalties. It doesn't attack weeds. It stops root formation in germinating seeds. All germinating seeds. Every one. Which means, if you spread the cup in April, and then in May you throw down grass seed to patch that thin spot by the porch, your grass seed will not come up, and you'll blame the seed. You'll take it back to the store. You'll tell the young fellow behind the counter his seed was no good. It was fine. It landed in soil that was still saying no to every seed that touched it. Leave at least 6 weeks between the cup and any seeding. 6 weeks, minimum. That's the honest number. And once you see how the year lays out, it works rather beautifully. Spring, Forsythia yellow. The cup goes down. No seeding. Late summer, around Labor Day. The cup goes down again. And then late fall, after the first hard frost. That's when you seed. 6 weeks and more have passed. The soil has forgotten. The seed takes hold, sleeps through the winter, and comes up in spring as though it had always been there. Everything in its season. That's not poetry. That's just the calendar telling the truth. Now I want to do something no one selling you anything will ever do. I want to tell you exactly where this fails. Because I've watched a great many gardening videos, and I've noticed something. The ones that promise the most usually deliver the least. Every one of us has been let down by a bag with a beautiful photograph on the front. I would rather you trust me in 5 years than be dazzled by me today. So, 4 honest limits. 1. It does nothing to weeds already standing. Nothing. The dandelion in your lawn right now has a taproot as thick as your finger and 1.5 feet deep. The cup will fertilize it. Dig those out first. Prevention is for what's coming, never for what's already there. 2. It does very little against weeds that spread by runners. Creeping Charlie, ground ivy, Bermuda grass sneaking under the fence from a neighbor's yard. They don't bother with seeds at all. They crawl sideways underground and surface wherever they please. A pre-emergent has no answer for that. 3. It is not cheap. Iowa State says so themselves. It is often more expensive than other pre-emergents. 5,000 square feet of lawn needs 100 pounds in application. 4 bags, twice a year. So no, I'm not going to stand here and tell you this saves you $600. It may well cost you more than the chemical would. I still use it. In a moment, I'll tell you exactly why. And 4. The honest one. Not every university agrees on how well this works. Iowa State, who invented it, says results may not be obvious after a single application in the first season. And that control improves with every year it's used. And out at Washington State, researchers looking at real field trials found something different again. Out in real yards, in real weather, the weed control often didn't show up the way it did in the greenhouse. But the turf, they noted, responded beautifully to the nitrogen. I could have hidden that from you. It would have made a cleaner video. But you've been gardening 40, 50, 60 years. You already know nothing on this earth works the same in every soil under every sky. You'd have smelled the lie. So let me tell you what I honestly believe. The cup was never a poison. And it was never a miracle. It is 2 gentle nudges in the same handful. It stops some of the seeds. More in a dry spring, fewer in a wet one. And it feeds your grass into the kind of thickness where seeds can't find bare ground to land on in the first place. And that second effect, that's the one that wins. That's the quiet engine underneath the whole thing. Because here is the truth of every lawn I have ever known. Weeds don't beat grass. Weeds move into the room, the grass left empty. The cup doesn't win by killing. It wins by filling the room. Which brings me to the part I've been waiting the whole video to tell you. The cup cannot do this alone. It never could. And every person who's ever been disappointed by corn gluten meal was disappointed because they asked it to work by itself. It has 3 helpers. And I want you to notice something about all 3. They are free. And every one of them means less work for you, not more. 3.5 inches. 4. High. Because here's what a crabgrass seed needs before it will even consider waking. Light striking, bare soil, and warmth. Tall grass casts a shade. The ground beneath stays dark and cool. And the seed lies right there. 1/2 inch down, ready, willing, and never receives the signal. We cut our grass short because we think short means tidy. But every time you drop that blade, you are turning the lights on for the crabgrass. And here's my favorite part. Tall grass holds its moisture better, which means it grows slower, which means you mow less often. Less work, fewer weeds, nothing to buy. Most of us water a little, most days. 20 minutes with the sprinkler in the evening. It feels like kindness. But think about where a crabgrass seed lives. The top 1/2 inch of soil. And what does it need? That top 1/2 inch, kept damp. A little water every evening keeps exactly that layer damp, every single day. My friends, you are running a nursery. Instead, 1 long, deep soak a week. Let the surface dry between times. The weed seeds up top go thirsty. And your grass roots, finding nothing at the surface, are driven downward to look for it. Deeper roots. Tougher grass. A lawn that shrugs at August. 1 trip out with the hose instead of 6, and a stronger lawn for it. This one will change your lawn more than anything else I say today. The strongest weed killer that has ever existed is not a chemical. It is density. So grass seed in spring, and those tender seedlings must fight crabgrass all summer for every drop of water. They usually lose. So in late fall, after the first hard frost, the soil still warm, the air cool, and not one weed left alive to compete with them. They root through autumn, sleep through winter, and come up in spring ahead of the crabgrass instead of behind it. And do you see how perfectly this fits the cup? The cup goes down at Labor Day. 6 weeks pass. Late October, after the frost, the soil is willing again, and that's when you seed. They don't fight each other. They take turns. Leave your grass clippings on the lawn. Don't bag them. They break down and hand a good share of that nitrogen straight back to the soil. Between the clippings and the cup, you will likely never buy fertilizer again. And you'll never drag another heavy bag out to the curb. 3 helpers, all free, all less work. And now the cup can do what it was always meant to do. Now, some of you don't have much lawn left and don't want any. Good. Neither do I. most days. So here's where the cup earns its keep in the garden. In your perennial beds, hostas, daylilies, peonies, all established, all with old deep roots. The cup can't harm one of them. But every weed seed drifting in on the wind and settling on that bare soil between them, it has to germinate, and it won't get its root around your vegetable transplants, but only once they've settled in. Tomatoes, peppers, the broccoli you set out as seedlings. Give a transplant 2 or 3 weeks to take hold, then sprinkle around it, never on it, but never where you've sown a seed. Not the carrot row, not the beans, not the lettuce, not the zinnias. The cup has no idea your carrot is a carrot. It only knows that something small is trying to make a root, and it says no. And one more thing, which may cost me a little credibility with the people who sell this stuff. In your flower beds, a good layer of wood chip mulch will outperform the cup. It smothers more weeds, holds the moisture, feeds the soil life, and costs less. The researchers at Washington State say so plainly. So use the cup on your grass, where mulch cannot go. Use mulch in your beds, where it can. I'd rather tell you where my own advice runs out than watch you waste a bag on the wrong ground. There's one more thing about that yellow powder, and for me, it may be the best thing of all. It's animal feed. It's been fed to hogs and poultry and pets for 100 years. It's protein, which means when your grandchildren come tearing across that grass on a Saturday afternoon with their shoes off, you don't have to call them back. You don't have to check a label for how many hours they must stay away. You don't have to stand at the door and say, "Not today, sweetheart." They can just run. There's a peace in that which I did not expect, and which I've come to value a great deal more than a perfect lawn. And 2 quick answers, because I know they're coming in the comments. No, it is not wheat gluten. If someone in your house has celiac disease, corn protein is a different thing entirely. And yes, your dog will try to eat it. It's food, after all. Spread it, water it in, let it settle. Then let the dog be a dog. Here's the whole thing plain, so you can write it on a card and tape it inside the cupboard door. Morning 1. Early spring, when the forsythia turns yellow, or the redbud, if you're down south. 1 cup for every 4x4 foot patch. Water it in lightly, then 4 or 5 dry days. And no fertilizer. The cup is the fertilizer. Morning 2. Late spring. Walk the yard with a long-handled weeder and take out whatever came up anyway, and snip the heads off the dandelions before they go white and blow. 1 year's seeding is 7 years weeding. Morning 3. Late summer, around Labor Day. Same cup, same rate. Almost everybody skips this one, and it's the one that quietly decides next spring. Morning 4. Late fall, after the first hard frost. Now you seed the thin places. 6 weeks have passed. The soil is willing again, and running underneath it all year. Mow high, water deep, leave the clippings. 4 mornings, perhaps 2 hours out of your whole year, and every year a little thicker. Every year a little less work than the year before. That's the part that still surprises me. Most things in a garden ask more of you as time goes on. This asks less. My friends, I want to leave you with the thought that's been sitting with me all through the making of this. We spend so many years fighting weeds, pulling them, spraying them, cursing them on our knees in the July heat. And I've come to believe most of that fighting was never necessary. A weed is not an invader. A weed is an opportunist. It doesn't break down the door. It finds a door already standing open. A thin place, a bare place, a patch where the good thing had grown tired and given ground. And that yellow powder in that ordinary cup, it doesn't fight anything at all. It just fills the room. It feeds what's already rooted until there is simply no space left for anything else to move in. It isn't a battle. It's a crowding out. A lawn so full of life that the weeds arrive, look around, and find nowhere to set down a root. And I don't believe that's only true of grass. I think a great many of the troubles that move into a life move in through the empty rooms, the idle hours, the thin places we let go bare because we were tired or because it was easier not to tend them. And after 68 years of it, I've come to think the answer was never to fight harder. The answer was to plant something good, feed it faithfully, and be patient while it fills. Year 1, you'll hardly see it. Year 2, you'll begin to. Year 3, you'll look out at what you've quietly built and hardly recognize the ground you started with. That's not a lawn tip, my friends. That's just how anything worth having ever gets made. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, Which weed has beaten you, year after year? Crabgrass? Creeping Charlie? Dandelions in the driveway cracks? Tell me what you're up against and where you garden, and I'll write back with what I'd honestly do about it. I read every single one. It's the best part of my week. And if there's someone in your life still fighting their own front yard, a brother, a neighbor, the fellow at church who won't stop talking about his lawn, send this to them. Not to prove them wrong, just to hand them back a few Saturdays. Watch for the forsythia, my friends. When that yellow comes, you'll know exactly what to do. Until next time, be gentle with your soil, and be gentle with yourselves.